Howdy, and welcome to the White Hat Law Show with Warren Nord, where we cover a mix of current events, politics, and the law. Take it away, Warren.
Welcome back to White Hat Law. I'm Warren Nord with Nord Law, and today we're going to talk about administrative law and all the fun that can be. With me is my good friend Bill Zedler. Bill Zedler has been state rep for the southern part of the county mostly,
right.
And in District 96
right.
since 2002. Sometime around there.
Except for the one term.
One, and then so there. I have a long list of accolades. I'll just, a smattering. Champion of free enterprise, Texas taxpayer hero, defender of life, hoo-wah, courageous conservatives award. There's a bunch of others too, but we only have 35, 40 minutes. So we're going to skip past that a little bit.
That's right.
But thank you for all the work you've done.
Glad to be here.
Not to mention served in Vietnam. Both of us were honorable discharge as first lieutenants, although I did not do Vietnam. So anyway, today we're here on administrative law. What is administrative law, Bill?
Well, one of the things that they have is State Office of Administrative Hearings, and it was designed in 1992 to basically separate the agencies that were involved in either correcting or disciplining certain people. Like in one of the cases I'm working on right now is the medical board, which oversees doctors, so basically it was to separate the agency from the judicial part of it, because before that time the agency was judge, jury, and executioner. And so
but let's back up. Why do we have all these agencies? Why do we have a medical board? Why don't we just have legislators that pass laws that say doctors shall do this or doctors shall not do that?
You know, they were formed a number of years ago. I kind of agree with you as far as I've looked and seen what they've done, and quite frankly, I think all too often they kind of push a cookie cutter type medicine. The other thing is, all too often, is no patient's been injured, no patient's even filed a complaint, and yet they'll drag a doctor down there to discipline the doctor. Why? Because he didn't do it their way.
Right. But before we get into the medical, there are a number of these boards, right? There's
a
board for all of the major professions.
Exactly.
And so there's a set of laws that kind of govern all the chiropractors, and a set of laws for engineers, and there's the professional engineering, Texas State professional engineering.
Lawyers.
And there's one at the bar for lawyers, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a set of laws that govern each of these professions, and then you have TDLR, which is Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation.
Right, and they'll overlook plumbers and electricians,
AC people, things like that. And so you have all these boards, and they are the subject matter experts for the industries that they govern, right?
Right.
And so because legislators are not all doctors, and they don't know exactly what a doctor should or should not be doing, but they know the doctor should be doing something.
Right, that's right.
It should have some responsibilities, and so we have these agencies, and I struggle with a lot of these. We're going to talk about the medical agencies today, but the medical board, and I've represented people for the nursing board, and we've sued people that are involved in towing. We deal with TDLR, but it does seem as though they kind of focus on minutia sometimes and miss the big picture.
No doubt about it, big time. I'll see them going after a doctor for false, misleading, deceptive advertising. At the same time, there was a notorious case in North Dallas of a Christopher Dunce that killed some patients, dramatically injured the others. They'll never be the same. Currently, he's in jail because that's how bad he was. And yet, it took them almost a year from the first complaint to finally do something. But they did manage to get the guy down there where the complaint about false, misleading, deceptive advertising appeared. They actually dealt with him before the neurosurgeon that was killing people.
Well, priorities. It's one of those things where I know how to deal with this problem, so I can go deal with this problem. I don't know how to deal with that, so I'm not. So that's the basics of administrative law. And we see this in the federal law too, with the EPA or OSHA.
Exactly.
And it all comes down, and we see this sometimes at the city council level. We'll have a library board that makes the rules, and so these are not all evil, and there's nothing really wrong with them. They just have to understand that they have limitations, and they don't always do what's right because they don't get the feedback they need to get from ordinary people. So we're going to take a break, and what we'll do is we'll come back in just a minute, and we'll talk about the medical board and the strange case of Dr. Van Boven and all of that.
Okay.
So we'll be right back.
Hang on, y'all. More with Warren when we get back. Welcome back, folks. You're listening to the White Hat Law Show with Warren Norris. Take it away, Warren.
Welcome back. Now, at this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a specific case where the system is totally fallen apart, from what I can gather. So, Bill, tell us, thank you, and again, for those you didn't catch first, this is Bill Zedler. He's state rep for South Arlington and surrounding area, and he's going to talk to us about, and he has some expertise in the medical field, so
Right.
we ought to mention that. Tell us about the strange case of Dr. Robert Van Boven.
Yeah, first of all, this was a man who had uncovered medical errors in the hospital where he was working and initially tried to solve the problems internally, but when he was not successful at that, he reported the problem to Health and Human Services, who came in and virtually validated every problem he had found. And then what happened, though, he started experiencing retaliation by people from the hospital, which eventually led to the hospital going to the Texas Medical Board to try and, when they were unsuccessful in retaliating against him there at the hospital, to try and get the medical board to retaliate against him. And so that originated with some complaints at the medical board, which ultimately ended up with him having a temporary restriction put on his license.
Wow.
And basically then, rather than maybe a 60-day delay between the time that temporary restriction went on to the time that he'd gone before the State Office of Administrative Hearings, it went on from, well, he had the temporary restriction in February of 2016. The hearing did not take place until May of 2017.
So they're impoverishing him.
That's exactly right.
deliberately-
And they were trying to destroy him financially. In fact, one of the people involved had said if Dr. Van Boven did not drop the case, he would make sure he never worked another day in this town. And so what led to that was the administrative law judge, Hunter Burkhalter, had ruled that in Dr. Van Boven's favor, and ultimately what we found out since that time, that the percentage of times that the State Office of Administrative Hearing rules with the doctor is only 1%. 99% of the time they rule in favor of the medical board. And so...
so let me get this straight. So,
yeah.
so the medical board heard these complaints, and then they decided to discipline him with this restriction.
Right, and there were numerous instances of denial of due process along the way.
Okay.
Like in one of the cases, one of the patients, they had already dismissed the patient the previous November. They had already dismissed the allegations, only to bring that particular patient up again, not telling the people at the informal hearing to temporarily restrict his license that they had already dismissed the case. And then the other case was a patient that the executive director of the medical board had, in the end of January, had given them a continuance and said, we're going to give you a continuance for a couple of months. The only time they're supposed to have a temporary restriction hearing is if it's like, this is an emergency. This is like,
It's like a TRO.
Yeah.
So it's an immediate thing.
And unless we're trying to prevent some other patient being harmed.
Right. So the medical board sided with, decided to go after him, and then Burkhalter was the judge that heard it down in Austin. So
Right.
this is and what's the name of this organization again?
State Office of Administrative Hearings.
State
It's called
Office-
SOA.
SOA, right. That's how I know it, but I always have to think about what it stands for. Okay, so he appeals their decision
Right, to SOA.
SOA assigns a Van Burkhalter,
Hunter Burkhalter.
Hunter Burkhalter to hear the case. And what does Burkhalter find?
Burkhalter dismissed all the allegations against Dr. Van Boven. In essence, the real expert witness was an internationally recognized individual on what they call boundary violations, and typically this particular expert usually works with the patients, but after he saw the case, he came down as a witness for Dr. Van Boven, discrediting the two patients against him. And in essence, that was part of one of the reasons why Hunter Burkhalter ruled in favor of Dr. Van Boven.
Okay, so then it gets even more interesting, right?
Exactly.
So what happens to our judge?
Well, what would have normally happened was that they either appealed the decision, which they could have done, or they just complain about it. But in this particular case, he writes, the executive director of the medical board sends a letter of complaint to the senior administrative law judge complaining about Hunter Burkhalter's decision. And at that point, what happens is...
Who wrote that letter?
Scott Freshour, who is the executive director of the medical board.
Okay, so the medical board whines to SOA about getting an adverse decision.
Right.
Okay.
And remember this is only the 1% of the cases where the physician won before the state office.
I'm sorry, we're supposed to always win.
That's right.
I thought that's what this process was about.
And basically, at that point, the senior administrative law judge terminates Hunter Burkhalter, what the message is from now on, of course, would be that if you side with the medical board at the State Office of Administrative Hearings, you put your job in jeopardy, which is intolerable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're supposed to render a fair, just decision. They're not supposed to, how can I write this to cover for the state agency in question?
Exactly.
Okay, so and when you looked at this, what did you? Of course, there was a fine article written about this. By,
exactly.
We ought to give credit where credit's due.
Right.
Michael King, who wrote an excellent article for this, and I guess we could in the Austin Chronicle. Tell us about this 1% and what is supposed to happen there. So.
Well, let me give you an example. There was a time before we got in the last 10 years where if you had 34 cases were conducted, they dismissed 27. Or if they had 36 cases, they dismissed 22. But once you got up into 2007, if they had 48 cases dismissed 2, 70 cases missed 2. But in 09, 10, and 10, 11, and 12, they had 141, 71, and 85, and dismissed 0. In other words, they ruled with the physicians 0% of the time. And so what we began to see was if you were a doctor, and you might as well not waste your time and money to appeal it to SOA, because invariably you're going to lose.
And so if I'm a doctor and I have an accusation like this against me, I know I'm going to lose against SOA. What's my other option?
Well, at this point now, you've got to end up, and it's very difficult because the way the law is, you basically end up filing a lawsuit against the board.
In Austin. Mm-hmm. So if you're Amarillo or Dallas or Houston, guess what? Every time you have something going on, you get to go to to Austin.
Yeah.
And so, what is the situation right now for the doctor?
Well, basically, even though the executive director at the medical board complained to the State Office of Administrative Hearings, the board itself, the appointed members of the board, elected to dismiss all allegations against Dr. Van Boven. And but that didn't stop the executive director from sending this letter of complaint to the State Office of Administrative Hearings, and was ultimately resulted in Hunter Burkhalter being terminated.
So the underlying case is over?
By and large, it is, except for one thing. When you first restrict a person's license, you send notification up to the National Practitioner Database, which is in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And what should have happened at this point, after the board dismissed the allegations, was that they send in what they call a void order, which removes all allegations before the National Practitioner
Expunges all the negative information.
Expunges all the negative information. Well, in essence, what Scott Freshour elected to do was, in essence, send a letter of revision, which in essence goes through all the allegations against Dr. Van Boven, but ends up down at the bottom saying, oh, by the way, the medical board dismissed all allegations. But what that does is it gives a very misleading, narrative of what should have happened.
It's a cloud on your license, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, as you know, JPS, we have executive session, every time we get together as a board, and we go through doctors who have those issues, and we have to talk about whether or not this is an issue that's keep them from being employed by the hospital. So. These do matter. They absolutely do matter. And so it doesn't take much to knock you out.
Right.
Just because nobody wants to be responsible for hiring a bad seed. So, okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll take a break and we'll come back in just a minute and we'll talk about the solution to all these problems.
Okay.
We hope.
Hang on, y'all. More with Warren when we get back. Welcome back, folks. You're listening to the White Hat Law Show with Warren Norrid. Take it away, Warren.
Okay, well, welcome back. So we're here with Bill Zedler with District 96, and he's going to tell us about his ideas for helping to fix the problems that we might have with this administrative law stuff.
Right.
Bill, tell me what your solutions are.
Well, first of all, the medical board is coming before sunset, and it'll be going through that. It had failed to get through sunset.
Okay. Not everybody knows what sunset is. So
let's dismiss that then.
We just keep going.
Okay. And in essence, my first goal has been to get people informed about what's been going on. And so one of the problems is when you tell people about the denial of due process, that kind of rings a bell with a lot of people. The other thing is that what we want to do is try and implement laws that will rein in this particular case, the medical board, and kind of keep it from going outside the bounds of what we would call due process. But the other thing, what we want to do is, instead of, if you go to the informal settlement conference and you disagree with the board's proposal of remedy, that the doctor, instead of appealing it to the State Office of Administrative Hearings, he'd be able to appeal it to the district court in which the county of their residence, and have a trial de novo, have it a brand new trial.
Right.
Now, I'm sure some of the people at the state are going to say, oh, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. I don't believe it will, because I believe what will stop is all the frivolous nonsense that very often occurs currently. All the time I'm seeing cases where no patient's been injured. No patients even filed a complaint, and yet they're dragging the doctor down there for some case in which it's really, they've been found guilty by a quote-unquote expert who, and I'll give you a prime example, where they're dealing with these pain medications. And the expert that the board is using doesn't treat patients clinically and doesn't give prescriptions for pain medications.
So you have an ivory tower
how
doctor.
do you have him or her being the expert witness? Yeah. Well, this is routine occurrences down on the medical board.
Yeah, that's so the first step is to, well, okay, I like that, and that I think, aren't the lawyers like that? I should know, I guess, but I'm not sure what the process
Well,
is.
I think with the attorneys, from what I understand, there's really more due process for the attorneys than there is for the doctors. And some of the other boards, like the chiropractic board, the dental board, the optometry board, a lot of these others, we rarely hear real complaints. The veterinary board is another one. Rarely hear complaints about the denial of due process. This one has been a case, though, that it's been an ongoing complaint for some time.
Okay. Now, I think we talked about sunset a little bit. What generally is the sunset
Every
process?
agency goes before the sunset agency and commission every so many years. And in this particular case, the medical board had not been before sunset for 12 years. They came before it last session. It didn't make it through. So we passed just a little rider that basically said, look, we're going to fund the medical board for another 2 years, and it'll come before sunset again in the legislative session of 2019.
Bill, I'm just going to ask you, because this sunset process, does it ever actually do anything? Because it seems like it's a toothless threat. Oh, we're going to not approve you for those 2 years, but nothing really ever happens.
Well,
I get that right or wrong?
no, I'm afraid to tell you that you're right. Very often what I've seen, like for instance, when the medical board went through sunset in 2017, the agency, the Sunset Commission, was just inundated with all kinds of complaints, including a long letter from the Texas Medical Association talking about all the egregious problems going on with the medical board. When the agency did their report, it was totally ignored. And so...
does that mean that legislators are shielding them from real criticism?
Not necessarily legislators. I'm afraid it is, what you see down there is very often one agency trying to protect another. And it's just like the State Office of Administrative Hearings protecting the medical board, that kind of thing. And so, but what it does tell you is, and this is one of the things I've told people, there is nothing more dangerous than to have an unelected bureaucrat with the power of the state behind them.
No doubt.
Doesn't matter whether it's TCEQ, who it is. They don't necessarily plan on getting due process before a government agency.
Well, that's a real problem. Yeah, that's a real problem. I mean, it is a difficult task. I think about in my theory world, I want legislators to pass laws, and I want people to follow them.
Right.
And I don't want a bunch of subject matter people getting involved and saying, well, I think that this much pollution is okay, and this much pollution is not okay, or this banister has to be 36 inches tall. I want legislators to pass laws. But there is a reality that it's helpful to have some level of administration that kind of plays go-between.
Right.
You see TDLR with towing laws about what's required. They have to accept credit cards. Do we want the legislators having to pass all of these individual little rules?
Right.
It's helpful, but there's a problem. Now, you've also talked about changing jurisdictions so that, well, you talked about that a little bit earlier. What would be the practical impact of that?
Again, I believe what would happen is they would only take cases that where there would either been really a patient had been injured or a real legitimate patient complaint. Those would be the only cases that would go forward, because the medical board would know that if they take some frivolous case forward, they're going to get their heads handed to them. And so the end result is, even though it may take more money on those cases where someone's actually been injured or there's a real a legitimate patient complaint, that in essence, those are the only ones that will be taken forward, as opposed to taking forward all these instances where, again, no patient complained and no patient was injured.
Well, certainly it would allow doctors to fight back without having to invest in a faraway attorney that they've got to go visit with and don't know and have little contact with, and bringing everything that's important to Austin. I think the more we decentralize, the better we be.
In fact, one of the things I've seen is that very often a lot of the attorneys down there are really that they really are a little bit afraid of really taking on the medical board and hitting them hard. The reason why is because they know, well, I'm going to have another client that's going to be coming before the medical board, and I don't want them to remember the way I was in this first client.
No doubt. Well, Bill, I want to thank you very much for coming on. This is Bill Zedler, and he's your state rep if you're in South Arlington and trending all the way down that
South
side.
Tarrant County.
South Tarrant County. Probably up for re-election coming up, but I don't want to get involved in any candidate rules where I'm supporting somebody. So thanks for coming in.
Sure.
And we'll hope to see you again next week. And so goodbye from White Hat Law.
Well, that's a wrap, folks, and we want to thank you for listening to the White Hat Law Show here with Warren Norrid. To find out more about Warren, check him out at norridlaw.com. See you next time.